In September 2023, a demolition crew from Taziker Scotland cut through the last section of Garlogie Dam on the Leauchar Burn in Aberdeenshire, a concrete wall nearly 19 feet high and over 100 feet wide that had blocked one of the River Dee's tributaries for exactly a century. Within hours of the final section coming down, water flowed freely through that channel for the first time since 1923. Within days, otters were seen investigating the newly exposed streambed. Red kites circled overhead. A badger set appeared on the restored banks. And somewhere downstream, in the cold, gravel-bottomed main stem of the River Dee, Atlantic salmon that had been locked out of roughly 12 miles of spawning habitat for 100 years were about to get an invitation that evolution had been waiting to deliver. What happened in the months and years after that wall came down is now being tracked by the River Dee Trust, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, and a network of electrofishing surveys and habitat assessments across the catchment. The dam removal reopened approximately 20 kilometers of precious spawning habitat, restored 500 meters of burn and riverbank that had been submerged beneath a reservoir for nearly a century, and unlocked a 3.5-hectare upstream site for full ecological restoration. For a species that has just been reclassified as endangered in Great Britain, with populations down 30 to 50% since 2006, and total Scottish catches hitting an all-time recorded low of just 28,933 fish in 2023, every mile of recovered river now matters in a way it never has before. This is the full story, from the industrial decision that blocked this river in the 1920s, to the 10-year campaign to bring the dam down, to what is now happening in the water column of a Scottish burn that has not seen a migrating salmon in living memory, and why this one dam removal in Aberdeenshire is part of a movement that is tearing down barriers across an entire continent. Most videos about dam removal show you the dramatic demolition footage and call it progress. This one follows the science behind the decision, into the habitat assessments that calculated exactly how much spawning ground was locked away, the sediment management plans that had to be solved before a single stone could be moved, the broader crisis facing Atlantic salmon across the North Atlantic, and the evidence of what happens ecologically, hydrologically, and biologically when you give a river back its original architecture. Every claim in this video is sourced from the River Dee Trust, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, and NatureScot's Atlantic salmon monitoring data. This is not speculation. This is what the habitat surveys and the early post-removal observations actually show. But before you can understand why tearing down one dam in Aberdeenshire matters, you need to understand what Scotland and the entire North Atlantic is losing right now, and why the clock on Atlantic salmon is running out faster than most people realize. The Atlantic salmon is not just a fish, it is one of the most extraordinary migratory animals on Earth. A wild Atlantic salmon hatches in the cold, gravel-bottomed headwaters of a Scottish river, sometimes in a stream no wider than a sidewalk. It spends 1 to 3 years growing in fresh water as a parr, feeding on invertebrates, sheltering behind rocks, learning the chemistry of the specific water in which it was born. Then it undergoes a physiological transformation called ammoniacal multiplication. Its body chemistry shifts, its scales turn silver, and it migrates downstream to the sea. It crosses the open North Atlantic, traveling as far as the feeding grounds off Greenland and the Faroe Islands, a round trip that can exceed 6,000 miles. It spends 1 to 3 years at sea, growing from a 6-inch juvenile to a powerful adult that can weigh over 30 pounds. And then it comes home. It navigates back across thousands of miles of ocean to the exact river, the exact tributary, the exact stretch of gravel where it was born, guided by a chemical memory of the water that scientists still do not fully understand. That return journey is where the problems start. Because for a salmon to spawn, it has to reach the gravel. And across Scotland, across Britain, across Europe, thousands of man-made barriers, dams, weirs, culverts, and mill races have been blocking that journey for centuries. Later in this video, you will see exactly what happens when one of those barriers comes down and the gravel becomes reachable again. The speed of the biological response is unlike anything the models conservatively predicted. But first, how Scotland's salmon reached crisis point in the first place. When you block a river with a dam, you do not just inconvenience a fish. You sever a reproductive cycle that has been running for 6 million years. Scotland blocked its rivers systematically. Beginning in the Industrial Revolution and accelerating through the 19th and 20th centuries, dams and weirs were built across Scottish waterways for hydroelectric power, mill operations, water supply, and estate management. Some were essential. Many outlived their purpose within decades. The Garlogie Dam was a case in point, built in the 1920s to generate electricity for Dunecht House and its estate workshops. It was decommissioned shortly after the national grid expanded to the area. The hydropower station stopped operating, but the dam stayed. For 100 years, a wall of concrete that served no active purpose continued to block the Leauchar Burn, one of the tributaries feeding the River Dee, itself one of Scotland's most important Atlantic salmon rivers. The Garlogie Dam was not alone. It was one of 4 major barriers on the Leauchar Burn system. Fish migration on the Leauchar Burn was completely blocked until a fish pass was constructed on a downstream barrier in 2014. After that, salmon began recolonizing parts of the burn, but the Garlogie Dam, sitting upstream at nearly 19 feet high, remained an impassable wall. No fish pass was feasible at that height. The only solution was removal. Across Scotland, the picture is the same. Nature Scots monitoring data confirms that since the 1970s, the total estimated number of salmon returning to Scottish rivers has declined from around 1 million to approximately 400,000. In 2023, Atlantic salmon in Great Britain were officially reclassified as endangered on the IUCN Red List, reflecting a 30 to 50% decline in British populations since 2006. The 2023 Scottish catch figures were the lowest ever recorded. Dr. Alan Wells, Chief Executive of Fisheries Management Scotland, described the numbers as catastrophic. Sir David Attenborough has publicly stated that Atlantic salmon could be extinct in British rivers within the next 2 decades. The causes are multiple and compounding. Climate change is warming river temperatures, reducing survival of eggs and juveniles. Sea lice from salmon farms are weakening smolts on their migration to the ocean. Marine survival rates have collapsed for reasons that are still being studied, but one cause is directly fixable right now, with existing technology and no ongoing cost: man-made barriers. What Scotland did at Garlogie took 10 years of background work by the River Dee Trust and the Dee District Salmon Fishery Board, working with SEPA, Dunecht Estates, and Aberdeenshire Council. The project was funded by the Scottish Government's Water Environment Fund, administered by SEPA. And it almost did not happen because removing a century-old dam is not just an engineering problem. It is a sediment problem, a flood risk problem, a heritage problem, and a regulatory problem, all of which had to be solved before a single stone could be moved. The Garlogie Dam. Preferred Option Statement, the most technical planning document produced for the project, ran a full engineering options analysis, a quantitative habitat assessment, a fish passage justification, a sediment management plan, and a flood risk evaluation. The assessment confirmed that removal would open access to over 30 kilometers of stream network, including approximately 10 kilometers of good quality salmonid spawning habitat. The sediment trapped behind the dam, a century's worth of fine material, had to be managed carefully to prevent downstream smothering of existing spawning gravels. The 2 sides of the dam wall were retained to preserve the industrial heritage story of the site. The central section was cut away and the water was released. What happened next took just weeks, and it produced an ecological response that the on-site team described as immediate. The moment the water started flowing freely, the wildlife arrived. Otters, a species that depends on healthy freshwater ecosystems and the fish populations within them, were observed by the demolition crew within days. Red kites, which scavenge along river corridors, began circling the site. A badger set established on the newly exposed banks. The 500 meters of burn and riverbank habitat that had been submerged beneath the reservoir for a century began showing signs of recovery within the first month. Photographs taken on September 30th, 2023, the day of completion, already showed a free-flowing burn with natural channel features re-establishing. where there had been flat, still reservoir water just weeks earlier. But the biggest question was not about otters or kites, it was about salmon, and the answer to that question is still being written. The River Dee Trust's plan for the Garlogie site extends far beyond dam removal. The 3.5-hectare upstream area is being restored with native tree planting to provide cooling shade for juvenile fish, critical as river temperatures rise with climate change. Large woody structures are being added to the channel. They create the kind of flow diversity that young salmon and trout need, shelter from predators, variation in current speed, and the deep pool and riffle sequences that define healthy salmonid habitat. Leaf litter from the planted trees will feed the invertebrate populations that salmon parr depend on. The restoration is designed to create a self-sustaining cycle. Trees feed insects, insects feed fish, and fish sustain the river's ecological and economic value. That cycle will strengthen over decades as the plantings mature. And that is where the story connects to something much larger than one dam in Aberdeenshire. Garlogie was not an isolated project. It was part of a coordinated movement that is now tearing down obsolete barriers across an entire continent. The first surprise was the scale. In 2023 alone, 487 barriers were removed across 15 European countries, reconnecting over 4,300 kilometers of river, according to Dam Removal Europe in its 2023 progress report. Scotland itself, in the same reporting period that included Garlogie, also removed the Crossmill Weir. Between the two projects, 69 kilometers of river were made passable for migratory fish. From 2021 to 2024, Scotland's broader barrier removal program opened up a further 1,400 kilometers of catchment for salmon and other migratory species. The European Union's biodiversity strategy has set a target of restoring 25,000 kilometers of free-flowing rivers by 2030. The Garlogie Dam, at 19 feet high and 100 feet wide, was the single largest barrier removal in Scotland's history. It will not hold that record for long, and that was only the continental picture. What the barrier removal movement means for the salmon themselves was something else entirely. Atlantic salmon have been recolonizing formerly blocked rivers wherever barriers have been removed, on the Clyde in central Scotland, across restored tributaries in Scandinavia, and in river systems throughout the North Atlantic, where industrial-era infrastructure has been taken out. The biology is clear. Salmon do not need to be taught where to spawn. They need access. Give them access to clean gravel in cold water at the right gradient, and the 6-million-year-old instinct does the rest. The first salmon to ascend a newly opened tributary is not a pioneer in the way we think of the word. It is an animal executing a genetic program that has been waiting downstream of every dam on every blocked river for as long as the barrier has stood. The full ecological recovery at Garlogie will take years, possibly decades. Trees planted in 2024 will not provide meaningful shade until the 2040s. Invertebrate communities need time to establish in the restored channel. Spawning success will need to be verified through electrofishing surveys that are still underway. But the trajectory is set, the water is flowing, the gravel is reachable, and the species that needs it most, the species that is now classified as endangered across Great Britain, has one more stretch of river to come home to. The Gaelic word for salmon is bradan. In Scottish folklore, the bradan fisa, the salmon of knowledge, is one of the oldest and most sacred stories in the tradition. A fish that carries wisdom in its flesh, that must be caught in a specific pool, that grants understanding to whoever tastes it first. The story has been told for centuries in a country whose rivers once ran silver with returning fish every autumn. The word survived the decline. The rivers still carry names that describe runs of salmon that no living person has seen at their historical abundance. Now, in one small tributary of the River Dee, the concrete is gone. The water is flowing where it was meant to flow. And somewhere downstream, an Atlantic salmon that has crossed thousands of miles of open ocean is navigating back toward the exact chemical signature of the water in which it was born, toward gravel that has been unreachable for 100 years, and that is now, for the first time since 1923, waiting. One dam, 100 years of blockage, 10 years of planning, a few weeks of demolition, 20 kilometers of spawning habitat returned to a species that is running out of time, and a movement that is now removing hundreds of barriers across Europe every single year, reconnecting rivers that the Industrial Revolution severed and giving an endangered species back the one thing it cannot survive without: a way home. But Scotland is not the only place where a returned species is reshaping an ecosystem in ways scientists did not predict. In our next video, we go to Ireland, where 245 Norwegian eagle chicks were released onto a coastline that had not seen them for over a century, and what the satellite data revealed about their expansion is still being studied today. If you thought removing one dam could transform a river, wait until you see what happens when an apex predator returns to an entire country, given 18 years and no human direction. You will not look at ecosystem recovery the same way again.